a story about a giant and about spinning and knitting. There aren't very many stories about knitting, are there? Lots of stories about weaving, but not many stories about knitting. And about making jumpers. A bit like this jumper. This is a story that took place in Scotland a long, long, long time ago. In the days when people had little gardens and they grew their own vegetables. They grew the potatoes and the carrots and the swedes and the turnips and the leeks. And this is a story about a widow with two daughters. And they grew all the vegetables they needed for the winter. But there came one year when their vegetables kept disappearing. That's very odd. They would get up in the morning and find that in the night the vegetables had been dug up. They thought, well, we can't carry on like this because we need our vegetables to get us through the winter. So the older daughter, the older sister, said, I will stay up tonight and I will find out who it is who is stealing our vegetables. So she sat up, wrapping a shawl around her against the cold, and she heard great, big, giant footsteps. And there was the giant. But instead of running away, because she was a brave woman, she drew herself up to her full height and stood up to the giant and said, You cannot take our vegetables. My mother and my sister and I, we need our vegetables. And the giant simply picked her up and carried her off to his castle. Giants always live in castles. Carried her off to his castle. And he sat her down and he showed her some sheep's fleece. Presumably quite a lot of sheep's fleece because he was a giant. So this is sheep's fleece. This is from a Hebridean sheep. That's the breed of sheep. This sheep was raised in Suffolk. And the black in this is also Hebridean. They're lovely sheep actually. They have great big horns. And he said, I need a jumper. And I need a jumper by the morning. And the older sister shook her head. Well, fleece, it has to be washed and carded and spun and plied and then knitted. The giant simply walked off. So the older sister did what any sensible person would do under the circumstances, which is she had something to eat. She made herself some porridge and sat down to eat it, and as she did so, perhaps it was the smell of the porridge, enticed the little people to come into the room. Tiny little people came into the room, and each of the tiny little people carried a bowl, perhaps a half a hazel shell, or perhaps the sort of stalky bit from an acorn, and said, will you share some of your porridge with us, because we're so hungry and it's so cold? And the older sister said, I need all the porridge for myself, for I am hungry and I am cold. And so the little people went away empty-handed. In the morning, when the giant came to find her, he found that all she'd done was a little bit of carding. He picked her up and he locked her in a cupboard. So when the older sister didn't come home, her mother and her younger sister obviously got a bit worried. So the younger sister said, tonight I will sit up and I will find out who is taking our vegetables, and perhaps they will know where my sister is. So That night, the younger sister sat up in the garden, and the giant came. And the giant picked her up, and the giant took her to the castle and sat her down in a room with the sheep's fleece. Not all sheep are white. Sat her down with the sheep's fleece. And of course she said, "But I can't make a jumper by the morning." But the giant simply ignored her. So, like her older sister, she made herself some porridge, and she sat and she ate it, wondering what she was going to do. And little people appeared again, and the little people said, "We're so hungry." But she was a kind-hearted woman, so she gave them all a little bit of porridge. And there was one of the little people, the little folk, the fairy folk, who was taller than the rest, and probably wearing better clothes. He said, "We can help you." If by tomorrow morning you can tell me my name, I will give you a jumper. The younger sister thought, I have nothing to lose. So she agreed. So the little people took most of the fleece. I kind of imagined that the younger sister did some of the work herself and sat there carding, or maybe working at a spinning wheel. So she was busy carding and spinning the fleece into yarn when she heard a knock at the door. You ready? A knock at the door. And there was an old woman there, carrying a basket of heather, who said, "You let me in so I can warm myself for a little." The younger sister said, "Don't come in here. This is the castle of a giant. Not a good place to be. I'm trying to work out how to escape." And the old woman thanked her for the warning and carried on her way. And as she walked across the heath, she saw there a mound. But from inside the mound she could hear the sound of singing and the sound of music. So drawn to music and drawn to singing, she looked through a little hole in the mound, and there she could see all the little people working away at their spinning and the carding and the knitting. And there was one person who was taller than the rest, who was bigger than the rest, who said, "By the morning I will have the younger sister. She will never guess. My name is Peri. My name is Peri of the Peri folk." So the old woman was intrigued by this, and she went back to the castle, and she talked to the younger sister and told her what she had heard. So in the morning, the little people appeared again, and this time, and I imagine it took all of them to carry a giant's jumper, all of them appeared in the room where the younger sister was waiting. And she said, "Ah, Piri, it is so nice to see you." And he was really outraged and said, "How did you know my name?" But she didn't tell him. And with that, because she had named his name, and when you know the name of something, you have a little bit of power over it, the spell, the enchantment that bound all the little people to Piri broke like the links of a chain when it rusts. And all the little people turned and thanked her and scampered away, free of their enchantment at last. When the giant appeared, she gave him the jumper on the condition that he never, ever, ever stole any of their vegetables ever again. And I like to think he didn't, really. This is my wheel. This is a nice wheel. Here you are, you see. And my wheel turns. And you can take fleece like this, and by a magical process of spinning and knitting, you can turn it into a jumper like this. This is these are different colours because they're from different breeds of sheep. Here we are, spinning and knitting. It's a form of magic, isn't it? It's a form of alchemy, taking fleece and turning it into a lovely warm jumper. There are lots of other stories on my channel. If you'd like to hear more stories, please do subscribe. Obviously, that's a variation on Rumpelstiltskin. Right, Rumpelstiltskin is actually about spinning linen, taking flax and turning it into linen. I like that one because I work with sheep's fleece. But do subscribe, do listen to some of my other stories, and do have a go at telling stories yourself, because stories like to be told. See you again soon, and take care.